And when this priest goes into this struggling parish, you see, if he had thought that his job was to resurrect and make a parish house, a church congregation, it's a Catholic church, come more vibrant, he never would have done what he did. Because what Father Boyle, because the church he found was in disrepair, in terrible shape, an old gnarly tree outside, a statue of the Virgin Mary kind of crammed in between two branches of the tree. But Father Boyle didn't think, my job is to go resurrect this sucker. Father Boyle hits the streets. He starts walking the neighborhood of, the area that he's in. In fact, it kind of really amazed people, and they asked what he was up to. Some people thought he was an undercover cop, and all that in priest uniform. I guess that's one of the things that the collar, does for you. It identifies you to folks, so there's no question of what, who you're supposed to represent. There are days I think we all ought to have them, so we'll be aware that we're supposed to be. I mean, it's one thing to have your fish emblem on your car, although, by the way, I've had a few of you with fish emblems on your car come by and cut me off in traffic, and you're slow too, and I want you out of the way. God is not slow. I can promise you there's no fish emblem on my car. That's kind of time off when I'm driving. But anyway, but all right, so I know there's no time off. But anyway, so but we're supposed to somehow, not just in jewelry, but the way we, so Father, now by the way, he walks the streets of this crime-ridden, gang-infested, territory, and he just begins to build relationships. He breaks up fights. Fast Company told one funny story about how he broke up one gang fight, 40 or 50 folks with all their bats. They're ready to, whomp on one another, and how he gets them to put the bats down. But in fact, he becomes so a part of that neighborhood that some of the folks go together and buy him a bike so he can extend his patrol every night. Now, he's not just out there just looking around and nosing around in people's, recycle bin to see, what they've been doing. He's building relationships, talking, giving people blessings. And by the way, he has started Homeboy Industries. You can look it up. And he is now employing about 250 people through Homeboy Industries, people who are coming out of jail, people who, for instance, he has a tattoo removal business because some of these folks cannot get a job coming out of prison with the tats that they're wearing. And so, or he has Homeboy Bakeries. And I love what the article says. We don't bake, we don't hire homies, these are his words, to bake bread. We bake bread so we can hire homies, because he understands that the blessing that these folks need is a job. I mean, they need Jesus, they need a job. They need God, but they need a job. And so their way out and their way into a different kind of life, you see, this redemptive mission of God that touches everything that sin broke, that sin diminished. And what brought me to this story again is the fact that when I said, how are we people blessed? The full page that introduces the article is Father Boyle with his hands on a man's shoulder, and he's praying a blessing. Later on in the story, Father Boyle is meeting with a group of girls that are in a juvenile detention facility, teenage girls. One of the things that really struck me in the story is when he's finished kind of with his lesson for the day, every girl one by one comes and he gives her he whispers a blessing into her ear. He says to the group, as he does it repeatedly, you are far more than the worst thing you ever did. You are far more than the worst thing you ever... I mean, this is what people of blessing speak into people. Now, that was not my idea of what us church people were supposed to be up to when I grew up. It was our job to convince the world that they are far less. We were out there to make sure that they were convicted of their sin, and confront people with their shortcomings. And well, how's that working for you? And and the truth is, I can't even change me. I turned sideways a moment ago to make a point, and I immediately regretted it, because up till then, you weren't sure if I was as big as I look on camera. And so every day, I start with trying to diet this body down to some svelte, like the camera person here, Jim, such a svelte person. But no, it's not my life, and it's not my fault, and God and I will go over that when I get together. But my point is that changing people is not something that we do. Jesus is the wrecking crew that gets in folks' life and does all of that transformation. But yet we are the ones that open up the chapter for them. We open up the possibility that people can, and we do that by being people of blessing. You see, when we bless people, we open them up to a whole world that's bigger than the narrative they are living. Most people, and maybe you, are living a story that's too small for their lives. And I will tell you that the narrative that's playing in our head is the way that we will live our lives. You think about Saul, for instance, King Saul, I should say, King Saul, the Bible, Old Testament, first king of Israel. You see, he never had a narrative in his head that supported his role as king. I mean, we are introduced to Saul with him hiding in the baggage, to use King James language there, and the carts and the stuff. I mean, he never saw himself as king. In fact, Samuel references this when he comes to depose him and saying, even though everyone else saw, you were from a good family, you were little in your own eyes. Just go back and read that. And so what happens is the narrative that is up here, we play into. Now, David, second king of Israel, interestingly, is exactly that. David's narrative allows him to live into being a magnificent king, even with all of his failures, all of his shortcomings. In fact, David calls himself, his most favorite description of self-appellation is the Lord's anointed. That's interesting because he uses this phrase, even though he grew up with his family of origin, with the story that when Samuel came to anoint him, his own dad couldn't come up with him as, first, second, third, fourth, fifth choices. But because David saw himself as the Lord's anointed, he could live into that storyline. And every time he fell down, he really fell up because he always saw himself as the Lord's anointed. That's the power of the narrative that's in your head. If I could come and talk with you today and suddenly, don't you feel better in life because I can't get to you today? You see, your life just went up. You have something to be thankful for. But if I were there sitting and talking with you and I was in a coaching session with you, we would tease out that narrative. What is it? What is the storyline? In fact, I do this with leaders all the time. I want to know the metaphor that you are living into, because that really tells me what storyline you're going to live. Now, our job as the people of God, it seems to me, is to replace the storylines that are conscriptive and are keeping people in prison and in bondage and in chains, and to replace that with a better narrative. It's the narrative of the kingdom. It's the narrative of what God wants for them. This is why, by the way, when John the Baptist sends his disciples to Jesus, are you the one or is there another? And Jesus gives him the description. You go tell John that the lame are walking, the blind are seeing, the lepers are... Every one of those very physical, positive ways of life was a description, code language really in the first century, for what would happen when the kingdom breaks out. This is why when Jesus heals people, when he puts their lives together, where it's psychically with a demoniac or an emotional transference or physically, all of those are manifestations of kingdom, which means abundant life. You and I have the privilege as the people of God, and if you want to be a discipler as well as a disciple, if you want to be a follower of Jesus that's missional, then we live out that discipleship assignment as we become people of blessing to the folks around us. As you prayer walk your neighborhoods, praying a blessing on every home. As you deal with a waitress in a restaurant, how can I ask God to bless you? As you pray especially for people that don't deserve it, like that employer, that supervisor who, is not, as we become people of blessing, we are living into what it means to be the people of God. That's what I mean by being a missional follower of Jesus, a disciple. All right, gang, should you choose to come back for the next session, we'll talk about something else.